Hello and welcome to the Spirit Guides Network radio show with your host Mark Chatterton. Tonight we are pleased to welcome Peter Owen-Jones, a Church of England parish priest who just also happens to be a television presenter of religious-based programmes. Many of you will recognise Peter from such programmes as Around the World in 80 Faiths and Extreme Pilgrim, which have been broadcast on BBC Two. Peter has led an interesting life, attending boarding school in England and then relocating to Australia, working in the advertising industry before changing his lifestyle completely to become a Church of England vicar. So welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll start off just going back to your past, because I understand that you left school at age 16 and ended up in Australia where you got into advertising. Could you tell us a little bit about how that happened and what your life was like then?
I was at an English boarding school, and I just from about the age of 13 or 14, I began to understand that the direction that I was being sort of groomed for wasn't the direction that I felt comfortable with, and wasn't the direction I wanted to go in as an individual. And that eventually sort of culminated in me sort of taking a very positive decision. So I sort of one evening left that school and I hitched home and climbed in through an upstairs window. There was no one else there. And then in the morning the school phoned and said that because I'd done what I'd done, I'd been expelled. And so in a sense that was probably quite a good thing. I think most people would regard that as a very bad thing, and that was a good thing. My family weren't obviously too chuffed about what had happened, and so they suggested I went to Australia, where they hoped a year or so on a ranch would sort of straighten me out. And in some ways it did.
How long were you actually in Australia for?
I was in Australia for a year.
A year?
Yeah, and so then I came back when I was 17, nearly 18.
Right. So was it a few years before you got into advertising?
Yes, I came back, and then I tried to take some A levels, but I'd gone pretty feral by then, and that really didn't work at all. So then I went back to farming, which I've always been a country boy. So I started working on farms, and I milked, and I was a shepherd, and then after about 4 years of that, and I was in bands, and I ran a disco, and just general colourful stuff. And then after that, I went out to London and got a job in the advertising industry, starting off as a messenger boy. And then I was in London for a while after that.
Okay. So from what I understand, you've been a vicar in the Church of England for the past 18 years.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah. What were the circumstances that led you to the Church of England, and how have you found it since then?
The circumstances were really, I'd sort of been experiencing a calling since my sort of mid-teens, really. And I thought that this was down to my imagination and nothing else. My lifestyle had nothing in common with any Christian values, and there was no recognizable Christian morality at the core of it. And so I just thought this was just completely fanciful. But it just would not leave me alone, and became more and more insistent in my 20s. And then eventually, I was always very clear that the calling was to rather strangely become a Church of England priest. And then in my 20s, I went to see someone, and they rather scarily agreed that this was happening. And eventually, I ended up in theological college in Cambridge, and latterly was ordained and took up a curacy on the fens. But I had no idea what the Church of England was like. I had a very romantic view of country ministry, and I've always been pretty clear about the fact that I always wanted to be a priest in the countryside. And I had a ridiculously romantic view about sort of butterflies and sugar lumps, and this was going to be a gentle life. I had no idea how bruising and how very, very difficult being a parish priest actually is. And it came as quite a shock, those first 3 years in a parish on my own, about really, really how difficult it is holding that in tension with your faith is a real challenge for anybody.
So, would you say you're fairly settled now within the Church of England after all these years, or do you still feel restless at all?
Yeah, I mean, I feel continually restless, really, and it's very easy. In some ways, joining an institution is very easy because if you can adopt the mannerisms of the institution, and whenever I see lots of priests on television, or if I watch songs of praise, or if I, happen to go to a meeting where they're full of priests, I'm sort of, it's like being in a room full of, people. Lots of priests have very successfully adopted the mannerisms of the Church of England and the mannerisms of being a priest, and they've sort of slotted into that role, and that's fine, and I'm not criticizing that, but I've never been able to do that, and I've chosen not to do that, probably more out of vanity than anything else, and so it's not an easy relationship. I'm not fully confident in the manner in which the church is presented, and I don't think the churches would be fully confident in me. But the Church of England has always sort of made room for its eccentrics and its shouters and its doubters, and that, in a sense, that degree of tolerance and that degree of fluidity, I have since discovered, is worth so much. And needs to be celebrated.
Okay, for the past few years, you've obviously got involved in broadcasting. How did that come about in your life?
I'd obviously written a couple of books. I wrote a book about what going through theological college was actually really like, and after that, another book came out about my first year in parish life. And the Church of England, the BBC were looking to follow a priest around for a country vicar around for a while. They were making a documentary called The Power and the Glory, and so they went to the Church of England and said, we'd like to, have you got any country priests? And they went, yes, we've got 10 specially trained country priests. And the director went down and met them, and they weren't really what he was looking for. And very fortunately or unfortunately, someone gave him the book that I'd just written, and then he came down and saw me. And then we started filming a couple of weeks later, and then that led on to a series called The Battle for Britain's Soul, and then after that there was another one, and then Extreme Pilgrim and Around the World in 80 Faiths and How to Live a Simple Life. I mean, I thought this was going to be a flash in the pan, and it would, if it lasted 6 months, great. If it lasted 6 weeks, great. I had no idea that it would sort of go to the levels and the places that it's gone to. And I'm immensely grateful for that.
Do you find when you're travelling about, people recognise you and start talking with you and so on?
Yes, everywhere, on the bus, on the train. Yes, all the time, and that's an incredible privilege. And yes, it's something that I've never got used to. And the mailbox is always full, and I think it's what they call celebrity.
Yeah.
Dare I say that horrid
yeah.
word.
Mm. I'd like to talk a bit about the Around the World in 80 Faiths programme now.
Sure.
You sort of went on a world tour. How long did it actually take? Was it all done in one continuous go, or did you sort of go to different parts of the world at different times of the year and so on?
Yeah, no, it was done in 9 goes. We would sort of go away for 5 weeks and then come back and have a week or so to rest, and then off we go again for another 5-week stint. So it was done in sort of nine batches over a period of probably about 12 months, all in all, and it was the ride of my life. Yeah.
Obviously, experiencing all these faiths, were there any that you thought, oh, I quite like this faith, I could easily leave the Church of England and start believing in that? Did you have any experiences of that at all?
No, the more I saw of other faiths, the more I began to understand the great strengths of my own tradition. Rather strangely, the grass isn't greener on the other side. If you get to the other side, it just enables you to see how green the grass is on the side you've just left. I think the faith that I admired the most was the the Jain faith, based at Travanbalingala in India, which decrees complete non-violence to all living creatures, and also the Bishnoi in India, who again have a policy of non-violence as well to most of creation. And it was those faiths that I found great solace in and great hope in for humanity's future. I don't think the monotheistic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, really have a very good record in terms of our relationship with the environment. And I think it's that question, how are we to be human within the context of all the other life on this planet? It's that question which will need to be answered. It needs to be answered urgently, and I think the monotheistic faiths need to begin really to start to find a way to express that. They haven't done so very well thus far.
Okay, what about the other extreme? Were there any faiths that you were really repulsed by or horrified by or anything like that?
Yeah, I was repulsed and horrified by voodoo, by the voodoo faith in Benin, in Africa, on the west coast of Africa. I saw nothing other than darkness there. And, it's very easy to characterize voodoo as being, this sort of, something, having a doll that you stick pins in. It's far, far darker than that. And I would countenance great care in getting involved in that. And I think also the very fundamentalist faiths that I met, and I'm talking about fundamental Christianity, fundamental Islam, any faith that had sort of gone down a literal interpretive route, I felt was in deep trouble, and really had very little to say to anyone who disagreed with them.
Last year, you took part in another BBC Two programme called How to Live a Simple Life, where you attempted to live without money. Was that easy, and do you think we will eventually live in a world without money?
It wasn't so much easy, it was just an incredible relief not to have to carry, my wallet on my back, essentially. And we don't know, I hadn't realized how heavy money is, and how, metaphorically, and how much weight we all carry around trying to service the needs of this thing which has grown into a monster. And I had no idea of the enormous sense of freedom that I would feel having handed my wallet over. I think we're in real trouble with money at the moment. I think we really are approaching a very deep pit. We cannot carry on living by the creed of more. Firstly, because more means more for some and sadly less for others. But also because this idea that more is going to make us happy is completely and utterly flawed, and it's a complete illusion, which we've all bought into, sadly. And so how we deal with that over the next 100 years, I think, is going to be very interesting, because we cannot carry on as we are. And I think, yes, in time, not to have the ludicrous notion, which has just happened, of a coral reef, or all the coral reefs in the world being valued at 200 million quid. That to me is just repulsive, that we should actually equate the value of a coral reef in terms of money. And if we cannot see the value of nature, the value of the natural world beyond some arbitrary figure that we might place on it, then we're in real trouble. And I think that was indicative of, spiritually how much trouble we're really in.
Now, just recently, last year, you brought out your latest book, Letters from An Extreme Pilgrim.
Yeah.
And in it you write letters to different people in your life, such as your children, your parents, the Prime Minister, God and Jesus. Having read the book, I must say that you said what you said in so many letters was like you were bearing your soul. How difficult was it for you to write these letters in the first place?
It wasn't really that difficult at all. I wrote that book when I was living in a cave in the Sinai Desert, and that degree of separation and going from a lush land of green and trees to a place where there is nothing, where there is only rocks, your memory and your sense of self, and more importantly, your sense of others becomes very, very heightened. And so it wasn't a difficult book to write. It was an absolute joy to write and reconnect and ask the questions that I wanted to ask. But really, I think what emerged as I was writing it was how other people, other human beings, and indeed our experience of the natural world have largely made us what we are. And we tend to walk around in this bubble called self. But in fact, I am a collection of selves. I'm a collection of all the influences that I've had, all the love that I've had, all the difficulties that I faced through my relationships with other people, all of those things absorbed. And, that collection of things is actually me. But on my own, I am nothing without those experiences. It's those experiences and those loves that have made me what I am. And so you have hopefully a much more connected view of yourself, and much less of this view of every man as an island, which I think is actually terribly depressing. I don't think we're islands at all. I think we can be if that's how we want to live our lives, but I cannot think of anything more lonely. When you understand everything that you've been given by others, something wonderful happens.
So I noticed one of the letters, as I understand it, was to Jim Morrison of the Doors.
Yes.
What is it that attracts you to their music and to Jim Morrison in particular?
I don't know. I mean, I first heard the Doors up in this top attic bedroom of a farmhouse. I was 13, and suddenly it just resonated. His words, the music of Ray Manzanero and just the whole band, and what he was writing, the perspective that Jim Morrison wrote from, I think really, I loved listening to it. I loved hearing him crying and shouting and sort of expressing, what he saw as beautiful. He wrote, as I said in the book, as a perspective sort of separated, as if he'd been cast down onto this planet without his consent, without agreeing to it. And he was telling us what he saw and what he found and where the contradictions were. And I loved that sense of eternity that he manages to garner through his lyrics. And I could go on forever, so look, I'm going to stop now.
Getting back to the book, obviously the experience of actually being in so remote a place must have had quite an effect on you. Would you say that was probably one of the special moments of your life, being in that cave, all isolated by yourself?
Yes, I mean, that experience, out of all the experiences I've had, has changed me most profoundly. And that's the place I go back to when I'm saying my prayers. That's the place that I find myself in time and time again. It was an extraordinary experience, but look, it's not one that it's not one that was just for me. We can all do this. It might not be something that we choose to do, but what is a month out of a life to actually go and sit, especially in midlife when we're sort of supposedly halfway through it? To be able to go and take that time, it's like being spiritually and mentally cleansed. Half of it's terrifying, and half of it's utterly beautiful and revealing. And it's there that you find out essentially who you are and where you are right now, away from the hustle and bustle of our heads, away from the demands of the economic dictatorship that we live under, it's an incredibly important thing for all of us to do.
So getting back to the present, you're currently a vicar, a parish priest of 3 different parishes in rural East Sussex.
Yeah.
Could you see yourself as staying there for many years, or do you think you'll eventually move on somewhere else?
I have no idea. I've never been so happy than where I am now. And occasionally, as a parish priest, you get lucky. It's just a good fit, and it just works intrinsically well. And I'm incredibly fortunate that I found a place where it really works. And I love being here, and I love everything about it. And it's just a joy to get up in the morning, being here in the communities that I serve. I absolutely love being here, and I'm not ambitious. I can't think. I have no desire to be a bishop or anything like that. I think the greatest privilege that as Christians we are given is to be able to practice our faith of love, and to be a priest within that is an extraordinary privilege. As each day passes, I see it more and more in those terms. And that's where I am right now. What will happen? What happens next week? Only next week knows.
Okay. And obviously, being a Christian, and there's so many different faiths around, what would you say? Because a lot of people say that there's a big awakening of spirituality generally, both in this country and throughout the world. How do you see that sort of panning out in the future?
I agree that we're on the edge of a very, very big awakening indeed. I think everything that I hear and everything that I read sort of points to that we're at the start of a process which will be very challenging and incredibly exciting, and there'll be a lot of tears, and we've got to grow up. We've got to move forward. It's the calling of each generation. But I think because of our very precarious relationship with the moment, our perilous relationship with the moment, with this incredibly beautiful planet that we live on, there needs to be a massive sea change. Not because we're all going to die unless there is, but because we can take a choice to live in a much more beautiful manner, in a much more harmonious manner, rather than relying on science to come and sort out the problem of population and the problem of feeding so many people. We can say, no, actually, that's not how we want to be human. We're all of us being given a choice now of how it is, how we're going to take humanity forward, what it actually is to be human, and with that comes some very difficult questions, some very difficult times, but also that is part of a spiritual awakening. These were questions that were being asked in the Axial Age. These were questions that were being asked at the Reformation, and these are very, very important questions to answer. And we haven't actually answered them for a long time. We've been so busy making money and flying to the moon and doing 1,000 things. We haven't actually sat down and said, how are we to best represent what it is to be human? Are we going to fly off to Mars and take all the gold out and do all of that? Is that in some way being human? Or are we going to sort of learn to take care of our planet, learn to nurture what we have? Are we going to be tender-hearted? These are all very important questions that we need to face and we need to answer. We haven't done so for a very long time.
Right. I've just got time for one more question. Have you got any more TV programs or books in the pipeline? I'm
sure there'll be some more television at some point. I mean, it's not something I go chasing after. And I'm currently in the middle of another book. So, yes, I'm meant to be writing other than dreaming. Or maybe I'm meant to be doing both. Hey.
Yeah, you never know. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for agreeing to the interview and for all that you've said. It's been fascinating, and we wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You too. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.